Hi guys, welcome to another episode of the 40K Stat Show. I am pleasantly joined again by my co-host Garrett here in his cold basement with his blanket, and we're gonna cover a couple of things today. Mostly the Codex Secondaries, which we kind of talked about a long time in the past. Long time ago, about what 3 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago before the holiday season,
Yeah.
and we're planning on mostly talking about like what their performance is so far, but because that's what it is. It's a 40K stat show, but really, mostly to talk about like are they going to shake things up in the meta? Additionally, we're going to talk about the dumbest important graph, which is something we've been hammering at to the audience for the last few episodes about regarding like what matters in the game, and I thought we'd be time to capture visually and explain visually what we're trying to hammer into all of you guys' heads. But for the most part, how's your holidays been, Garrett?
Well, I'm inside. I don't go anywhere. I don't see anyone. So I had nachos for Thanksgiving.
Yeah, nachos for Thanksgiving. And at least have some shredded turkey on it.
I did put chicken on my nachos. It was I'm not gonna cook a whole turkey just to bake nachos in a house of two people who have small stomachs.
I mean, isn't that the whole point of Thanksgiving is to feed ourselves silly and then have a bunch of leftovers? We're gonna hate ourselves for like 8 days until Christmas,
Well, the
basically.
problem is that my household doesn't eat things fast enough, so leftovers just go bad if we have too many. So we eat small.
Nah, man, I made some cassoulet for my parents who came over for Thanksgiving night, which is a very hearty French dish. It's basically pork, chicken, cooked in duck fat with like more duck limbs, and it's just very hearty. It's and then you drown that of white wine and red wine. So yeah, at the end of the day, if your liver doesn't give up your your entire personality, will, 'cause you'll
So
pass out.
we just finished watching the British baking show, and we heard the term stodgy so many times. I finally looked up what the word stodgy means, and it's like it fills you up with little flavor,
Ah,
and
yes,
you're like
like
super filling. You reminded me with that you're saying it just fills you up, and I'm like, is it stodgy?
no, it's not English cuisine. Sadly, it's just French cuisine. Um, I was a little worried because like when I made it last time, it was the beans were a little dry, and this time it came out perfectly. So I was very pleased with myself. But this is a 40K stat show, so maybe let's talk about some 40K stats. You know, the change. We haven't covered this for about 3 weeks now, so you'll notice that the data has basically a wider range of time between the typical recordings. But to be honest, the game count hasn't really changed that much since the last. So we had an extra week of basically 50% more recorded time, but the game amount didn't really change. It's a holiday season. So people aren't as playing as much, and then also Europe as a whole might be closing down a little bit more for COVID, so that's going to impact like number of frequency of games, especially recorded ones online. Uh,
I am noticing something right off the bat. So last time we had 1,296 games played. We now got 1,362, but we
yeah,
went from 5,600 point wins to 44.
yeah,
That
yeah,
is a drop in 100 point wins. That's a
yeah.
good period of time.
I mean, from my perspective, it's probably because they ate so much food that they basically started. The winners started getting a little too heavy at their table to get to get to the across the finish line with a bigger margin of wins. No, I
Yeah.
don't know. I honestly, I don't know why, because last time we had this kind of drop off, I was getting excited. I'm like, yes, finally the metas of people are figuring out how to play this game, so the gaps are gonna go down between wins and losses. And then like procedurally, the next time we did this show, I was just like, oh, never mind, it's back up to whatever it was to
Yeah.
like 2 weeks ago. So, whoop de doo
Well, we're back down.
Let's just keep doing this yo-yoing until we figure out, until like I get pleased with myself of my health metric, which is like I want this average difference between a win and a loss to go down to like lower 30s, mid 20s, and I can't wait until it gets to that point. Maybe it's maybe the keynote change between last time and this time is basically the introduction of Codex Secondaries. Maybe
Maybe.
that's the secret sauce into into making this meta healthy.
Right.
Guys will also notice that 100-point wins went down by one full percentage, which was really good. Like that's
Hmm.
healthy. We're talking about like the average difference between wins and losses. That's like the fat, but really, the body mass index is the 100-point win percentage going down to like almost nothing
Yeah,
because
that'd be great if once that's down. Maybe once everything opens back up and people are playing a lot more games, maybe we can finally get that number below like 2%. That would be wonderful.
yeah, that would be just quite amazing. The well, what else are we gonna about today? Uh, there is apparently no changes really in the average of between a win, loss, and ties this time cycle from since last time. Uh, the game results from per round basis almost flat, like from the last cycle to this cycle. Their losses basically stayed flat. Wins from each round even to the only round that really changed was the last round, which is basically the losers won lost by more points than they used to average. Same things basically could be said about wins. For the most part, the wins stayed flat all across, so unlike the losses, which tended to win with higher point or lost with higher points by round five.
I
So
mean,
that's
if we see this trend, so I'm looking at it, and so
yeah,
the average difference in win loss went down because the losers got more points. So the winners got the same amount of points, but the losers also bumped up their average points per round as well. And to me, that actually wouldn't be an awful trend if it continues, where everybody is learning how to score their own game. And
yeah.
so, I mean, we'll hammer into this once again, but if people are maxing out their secondaries themselves, and so everybody is, that tightens the game up. It comes down to only the primary of whether you win or lose. I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing. I think that would be a good indication that it's time to come out with a new GT book with a bunch of new secondaries. Um, but
Well,
yeah, I don't know.
to reiterate on what Garrett is talking about, I think he's indicating on the bottom left right graph, which is basically if you look at the pink ribbon line, you'll notice that each round the point differential between a loss keeps going down to the point where in round 5 was 27-point difference between a win and a loss, which is what you want to see in like 5-round events once again players get paired against similar skilled players as the round progresses. You won't see these gaps in wins losses go down, and which is nice because historically speaking, this is probably the steepest amount of point drop we've seen for a long time between first round difference and
Yeah,
last round difference, because that was almost
yeah. I mean,
nine
check out our
points.
previous differences up at the top, like what our average win loss difference is over time. Because we had a 1.5 point drop. Oh, you don't have the rest of the
You,
data.
oh, you can see it right here. It's the other
Oh
ribbons.
yeah, that's true. I was thinking of like looking at previous
Oh,
weeks worth of at
oh
least
yeah.
difference in points overall.
How far back do
Um,
you want to go? How far back do you want to go? Is the question.
I don't know, just like you know,
All right, we'll do it live.
and we'll do
It's
it
gonna
live.
take a
Fuck it, let's do it live.
It's gonna take a second. It's not gonna look pretty. Well, it's gonna take a second. So the average point difference. Let me move one out of here because I want to be able to see all of them with numbers. There we go. Perfect. Okay. So the earliest we have in this record was we went down from 36 on round 1 to 34. Right. So 2-point difference. Right, and then
Yep.
36 to 26, so 10-point difference. So almost 2 months ago, we had like quite an average, like similar average breakdown of point droppage. and then
Then we
which I
had
think
34 to 31.
which, by the way, I think it was that period of time I told you where I got excited because I thought like the meta would like finally start fixing itself.
Hmm.
I think it's that same episode. And
Yeah.
then last recording we had it from 38 down to 31, which is still relatively the same
Okay.
amount of point droppage, but it's still in the upper 30s of a gap, right? This is so not only is the gap dropping overall, but it was also the difference is a healthy dosage of reduction average during the round basis,
Yeah.
right? So that is the kind of ideal situation here, which is that we want to see basically. I mean, for me personally, I would like first round win losses to be near 30, and then like win losses difference in like round 5, and like the lower 20s.
Yeah, like
That's
mid,
where I
like
would.
early to mid 30s in the early rounds, maybe some 40s some weeks, but the later rounds should be in the mid to low 20s.
And the reason why I say this, by the way, is because we're going to talk about the dumbest important graph, and we'll explain later what that would do to that graph if we did actually have events that were, if we squish that shrinkage in the point differentials. Um, any other, things you want to mention on this slide, Garrett?
Um, just looking at, yeah, it's actually going back over the timeline, looking at the average loss per round in round 5. We're looking at lots of more points because the earliest thing we had round 5 people lost with an average of 43 points.
Yeah.
Um, and now we're upwards of, I mean, we can't see this week, but we go 50, 50, 53, 54, and I think this week was again like 54, 57 or something like that. So it seems like in round 5
It's
people are
53. It's the pink
53.
one.
Oh, there it is, the pink one. Yeah, so it's like people are earning more points in the later rounds as a loser, which I think is like just a raw number of points, not looking just at the difference. That means if you get to the end, people are able to probably either do well in the primaries or score their secondaries more. I would have to, look at the differences between primaries and secondaries on that. But I think that people are not getting shut down. The games are probably actually being played out, and so people are winning their able to earn the points they need to like complete a game. Because like I don't know, 54 points is not an bad amount of points if you think about it. That's basically getting
No.
half on both primary and secondary. That's not being shut out at all. That's a halfway decent amount of points for a loss.
Oh, yeah.
So I like seeing those high values on the losses actually.
Yeah. I agree with that. And I want to take a look at just 5 round events that if we had some. So we did have a little bit of. We did have 5 of those in the last recording since last or less in the time range, and nothing striking me as like much different than what we just talked about. Other than the fact that like the losses are the highest point losses average we're getting consistently for this week's data, if you'll notice. So once again, like, hey losers, way to go, scoring higher.
Yeah. Right.
Now I'm trying to look if there's anything else we can mention here. No, like I mean, it's just good for business. Just keep going in that trend, and everything will be a-okay.
Interestingly enough, at 5 round events, the 100-point wins jumps up in percentage. So
Yeah, yeah, it makes sense to me.
yeah,
More
yeah,
frequency of games and higher events, which means higher percentage rate.
I think also you get more of those early game shutouts possibly, where you get hundreds in the early rounds if in those larger events.
Yeah.
Versus the smaller events where you have a smaller pool, so it's like you might get one guy who's going to get the 100 points, but you don't have as many other people who they're probably more equally tied. So it's like you have a lot more of that in the beginning. You have that large skill difference more likely to happen at a larger event than at a smaller event.
Indeed. Let's see. I'm trying to minute. Yeah, I was gonna say like, honestly, I will in the next recording of this in 2 weeks, which is right before Christmas or like the week before Christmas, I don't think we'll see many more like in terms of like volumes of games. I think it's going to keep going down. So expect this percentage number to either stay flat or even go up, because I think at this point it's smaller sample size. The 100-point win games I think will be more prevalent. It seems to be what I've noticed so far in the data consistently. All right, let's move on to secondaries. I know we talked last week about secondaries, but there was a lot of like conversation and talking about Codex, and we didn't have Codex secondaries, and we obviously didn't have any real like fundamental data in them, for the Codex secondaries. And this time around we have, they're starting to trickle in. We're getting more visibility into them. This is a little different, representation of the last time we did a secondary breakdown, and that's mostly because I wanted to talk more about hard numbers instead of just straight visualization. And I wanted to talk about the first, second, and third pick that players are taking for secondaries, which I think was also a question we were getting a lot on the show. To start us off, I'm going to say the obvious thing. So ignore the dumbest important graph for now. We'll talk about it after. But this is for all factions. All right. You'll notice that Codex and other secondaries are becoming more prevalent, and the average scoring of 11.4 points. All right, guys, this guy isn't going to be falling. Yes, they're scoring higher, but they're also a much smaller percentage, like pool. So,
well, I mean, I would say that we'll have to see probably maybe another month or two, given the less events we're going to see. But like, let's give it another month or two to see if that average points come down. But we're looking at 2 points higher than the Strike Force ones, which we already saw. When you take non-core secondaries, you score much better than the core ones. And this one is even above and beyond that. Like, this is 2.5 points, almost 2.5 points higher than the Strike Force ones. You're able to score these a lot better. They're obviously less frequent because only 4 factions.
Well, 4 now, but they're only right now from this data. There's only for Space Marines and Necrons.
So only 2 factions are able to take them. So clearly the frequency is going to be lower. Let's just do this now. Looking at frequency taken, let's look at just Space Marines and Necrons. Like, if you can filter by just those 2 factions, and then we'll look at that chart up in the upper right, just comparing number taken for just Space Marines and Necrons. So Space Marines.
Let's do Space Marines first. All right.
5%. So that's a bit of a jump, which is surprisingly less of a jump than I would have thought. I mean, this is, again, based off of all of our data. So yeah, that was one thing that we wanted to talk about, is that our secondary data, unlike our previous screens, which breaks down things week by week, we don't break things week by week. We actually just aggregate all of our secondary data. So based off all secondary data taken from September to now, it is making up 5% of all secondaries picked for Space Marines. All Space Marine players since September, all secondaries picked, 5% of all of those is one of their Codex ones, is what I'm seeing.
Yep. And it is one of the highest scoring one for sure.
Yeah. So I agree with you that the sky isn't falling. It's not getting 15 points, but that is a fairly large bump in points. I think we should argue we'll get to it. Why I think the sky isn't falling is we'll talk about the dumbest important graph. So when we get to that, that's why the sky isn't falling, in my opinion. But just based off raw numbers saying it's like, oh, well, it's not performing as well as people are thinking. Actually, they are performing a lot better than other ones. So I think people's fears are valid that these secondaries score higher than others, and so they're much easier to attain. So that is a valid fear, but I don't think that matters.
Since you've made the case for why I'm wrong, I'll make the case for why I'm right, which is very simple. It's just a time equation. Every book is going to get their update. Every book will have their own codex. So if there's 2 things that are going to impact, that's going to arrive, right? There's going to be a quality. Are all codex secondaries going to be the same quality as these 2?
No, not at all.
Well, or better. They could be also just straight up better and easier to gain
Yeah.
points. Because I read some of the Space Wolf ones. The Space Wolf ones are pretty good in my opinion for Space Wolves. The point of the matter is I haven't yet to see a secondary where I'm just like, oh yeah, these secondaries suck for this faction. I've yet to read it. I'm waiting for the Blood Angel book to drop and see like what they are for Blood Angels as well. But as time goes on, this is going to be an
No,
option
no.
on every.
Wait till the Drukari book. The Drukari book, they're all gonna suck. Watch.
Oh, well, I doubt it. I doubt it. And honestly, it's getting to the point to me where like the reason why I don't it's the sky is not falling is it's not an average of 14 13, it's an average of 12 points, which is good, don't get me wrong, that's good, but it's also very small sample data, so it's caveat of basically just needs more time, both in terms of more releases and more time in terms of more data. I don't like to make like a dissertation on like such a small data set, right?
Yeah.
So
I mean, your more time argument, I think, is the argument people are making, where people say it's not fair that they have them. We should just wait till there are more out before we allow them, because right now they do perform better and only two people have access to them, which isn't fair. So why don't we just wait the extra year once everybody will have some? And I don't know. Well, I don't like that because then we're not able to generate data to prove it just feels like a snap judgment.
yeah. But you
like
also can't you can't make a decision off the data you have, especially when you know the data is flawed.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it's like.
Inherently, your decision and solution will be flawed. Now, you can make a recommendation based on the data, and you can say, at least this is what we're preliminary showing. And preliminary wise, is the average of, let's see, 3 points? 3 points more on average. Is that is that win or loss difference for Space Marines? Let's find out. Because that's the question we need to ask is the Space Marine army on average losing by that gap in points? I got sorry, my
saw a negative 10 on there, and I was like, oh boy, that
no, that was
it just flashed for a second. I was like, negative 10.
All right, so so a win versus a loss. Right, so on average, they're winning by less than a point. So you could make the argument that now, because of this secondary, they're going to consistently win more, right? Because but they're already on a 49, basically a 50% win rate. So what's going to bump them down to maybe bump them up to 52, 53% win rate? It's not. I'm still not sure. I would It's going to make a difference, but it's not going to make a difference over a long period of time because, like I said, as time goes on, that number is going to go down on average, and also more codexes are going to get added, right? So,
yeah. I mean, also on your time argument, I feel like one thing we noticed early on is that there was the big gap between winners and losers, and I think we argued as people learn the game and learn how to play against things. I think that's one of the things we saw through other secondaries, like Engage in All Fronts was starting to score less and less over time. Certain secondaries were just starting to, and the Bring It Down and what was the other? There's some of the not grind though, but Bring It Down and stuff were starting to be taken less and less because people are learning to play against them. I think as people learn how to handle certain secondaries, play against and for them, we'll start seeing that average points drop. It's just right out the gates, it has a 12 point. But maybe, as I said, once we get enough games in, like a month from now, 2 months from now, when we get the games in, that might drop down to a 10-point average, which to me, a 10-point average is way less of egregious than an 11.5. So,
yeah, the reason I say, once again, it is a time and I realize I didn't have set this up correctly, but I wanted to talk about how when we get to the third pick discussion, a lot of problem with the third pick players make, it tends to be the lowest scoring secondary they have. It competes between second and third pick. Their first pick is the pick they usually feel like they're going to score the most points on, right? And
Yep.
then on average, the third pick tends to be slightly lower than the second and first pick. And the Codex secondary, since they're limited to only one per army, it just fits that third pick role. It just basically makes that third
Yeah.
pick role almost a first pick, right?
Yeah.
So yes, I just you can make the argument that these two codex fundamentally have, and I'll spin it to Necrons now for all of our Necron fanboys. You could make the argument that yes, it could impact like these armies, but yeah, I come back to me in this in December next year, and let's talk again about it, right?
Right. Yeah. Right. Or even June of next year.
So, cool thing about Necrons, they're taking their codex a lot more than Space Marines, twice as much.
They're taking it as a first pick.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what you'll notice is that, like, their codex secondary gives the same amount of average points as the Space Marine one. They're taking, they're taking kind of, when you look at total mix, like, this is obviously jaded because there's this small the new Necron ones are a little bit small in the data pool size, but you'll notice, hey Jeremy, there's off of moments here. Yeah, there's unfortunately some user data entry problems where I think they entered the wrong one instead of entering their codex one, but that's okay because that will all get washed out in the end when some more people figure out how to use the scorecard correctly. But the point I was trying to make is that Purge the Vermin, Ancient Machineries, and all the other Necron ones are, I think, all above 10 points except for Treasure of Eons. That's right. Treasure of Eons is like the hardest one to score. It's like very situational. But Code of Combat is 12 as well. So the overall performance is that they're doing pretty good. Pretty good for Necron secondaries. Now, is that going to make a life and death decision? Like, let's look at the breakdown of the average Necron wins and loss time. I bet you it's a lot more. It's a lot worse than Space Marines. it's because they went from being non-existent to being a competitive list or a competitive army. Necrons. All right, so they were losing on average by 4 points, and now the gap for them is like 3 points, I think. So they're still technically, yeah, it's 3 points. They're still technically not, doesn't quite solve that gap yet. But that's just mostly because like the 3 point losing on average was due to the old book impact. Now we have the new book. I'm sure that will change over time, but that codex secondary brings them up to more parity in terms of average win rate from pure numbers pure numbers look. Let's talk about picks. I want to talk about picks. Let's talk about picks.
I want to talk about picks? All right.
And
then after that, we'll move to the dumbest important graph.
Damn right, we will move to the dumbest important graph. Okay.
All right.
I'll start us off again. Sorry. Engage on all front. Picked.
Oh boy.
22% of the time overall, but 41% of the time it gets, or 41% pick it on as their first pick.
So again, I want to, as I did probably 7 episodes ago, 22% of picked all the time. That's a 22 out of 33.
Yes.
So 22 out of 33 is very high. So actually, the 40% as the first pick is a less percentage than the 22 out of 33 overall.
Yeah.
Just
Just to mind fuckery. Yes, mind number fuckery. The way to read this, guys, for the audience is this is what they entered in the scorecard for their first pick, second pick, and third pick. That's what you see Engage on all front show up twice, in first pick and second pick. Obviously, when it gets picked the second time, it has a much lower pick rate from 41 to 15. The average point actually didn't change much. It's 9.13 versus 9.15, but the pick rate has dropped drastically. It's basically you walk into. Sorry,
I just want to say, looking at it's 9.13 to 9.15 on first pick, second pick, but on average it's a 9.03, which means when people are taking it as their third pick, they're not doing well.
No, they're not. In fact, let's look at the average on the third pick because you can scroll down here, so I can find it. Let's make that window a little bit bigger because I cannot seem to be picking it a little bit too fast.
There it is.
8.41.
Yeah.
So I guess the game
still not
theorist
doing bad.
The game theorist in me wants to say that like people who the first pick sort of in scorecard are usually the pick that people think they're going to score the easiest in the game. If that was true, right? If that was true, you would see a lot higher point values for the for engage on front, because they're like, if I'm picking engage on front 41% of the time as my first pick because I think I'm going to get 15 points of it, well, you're only getting an average of 9.13. Something is going wrong. Bring it down. Sorry.
I would argue that also engage in all fronts is probably a first pick a lot because it shows up first. Like if you look at the book here, Battlefield Supremacy is the first section of the secondaries. You have secondaries. It goes Battlefield Supremacy, then No Mercy, No Respite, then Purge Enemy. So when you're just walking through the book, engage in all fronts is first on the list. So that could also be a reason why it's a good first pick.
So what you're trying to say is people are stupid. Got it.
Well, yeah, but I mean, like, I would think like when I've been playing games on TTS, I just be like, I have to tap through the like different sections, and I'm like, oh, engage in all fronts. Let's tap to the next section. Like I just go like, well, I know I'm eventually going to pick engage in all fronts, so I may as well just grab it while I'm currently looking at what my Battlefield Supremacy options are, and then I'll move on to the next section because I at least get one section crossed out and I can move on. I don't know. That's what I do. I just be like, well, I know I'm going to pick it because I have, only 4 or 5 sections available. Well, one of them is like not even the psychic ones are usually I can't even do because either I don't have any psychers and they don't have any psychers. So I think there's only 4 sections at that point. And so it's just like, well, one of them, and I have to pick 3 of them. So I may as well grab engage in all fronts and then think of 2 out of 3 new sections. So that's my thought process that I go through.
I think your thought process isn't wrong, but I just don't think it's right either, because if you have 41% of first pick being on front, it has nothing to do with the fact that it's the first option available to them. It's just, I think it's, nobody approaches the table and thinks about like, I'm just going to pick my secondaries in order of the books. They're going to pick secondaries based on what they think they can achieve in the game. And what I'm trying to say is if they pick engage on all front as the first pick, the one they felt most comfortable with achieving, they're not doing the exact, doing that well and achieving it. Bring it down is the second. It's the second one in that priority.
What's your first pick? Usually.
Well, for what? For my sisters. Linebreaker,
sisters.
Linebreaker, and then teleport homers.
Okay, so you pick Battlefield Supremacy first too. I see how it is.
Yeah. But I also pick. You know why I pick Linebreaker? Because I know I'm gonna get max points out of it.
All right.
Do you want why I'm gonna get max point out of it? Because I have Efrol Stern and Kiganel. But I pick it. Maybe this is my personal bias because I pick my primary, my secondary. That's gonna be the highest performing one, and that affiliate is gonna be the highest performing one. And I'm just saying like the data is not supporting my point because people are picking engage on all front a lot, but they're not doing that well. Well, they're not maxing out nowhere near maxing out their points. I was gonna say, bring it down's next, and bring it down is just purely situational. It really comes down to what your opponent has. So you'll notice it's the one that shows up in the top 3 in all 3 picks, right? Because it is literally whatever. If your opponent has 3 or 4 vehicles, right, or 4 monsters, it's like what that you're gonna pick. It doesn't like it doesn't matter. Like it's the only time it doesn't seem to be doing well. Like it's floating between 10 and 11%, 10 for 11 points. So it seems to me on average that people kill at least 4 vehicles is what it comes down to, right? It's 2 points per vehicle or 3 points per vehicle. I forgot. I think
it depends on how many wounds the vehicle or monster have. It's 10 or if it's 10 or less wounds, it's 2. If it's 11 or more, it's 3.
Okay, so if they're scoring 10 to 11 points, you're probably getting between 4 or 5 vehicles a game, right? Or monsters. And then for the first pick, we have Grind Them Down as like the number 3 most popular pick. But I mean, the percentage points is Linebreaker, Assassin. They're getting very close after that. But Grind Them Down is, while being the highest third pick, it has, I think, like one of the lowest average scoring points.
Yeah, I originally took Grind Them Down when I was first playing the game, just because I was like, I mean, I was just like, whatever, it's easy. But like after playing with a couple of times, I'm like, dude, like you're not gonna get much more than 9 points most of your game, because you have to kill more than your opponent every round. And for those people who are super killy, if you table your opponent on turn 2, the most you can get is 6 points, because for turns 3, 4, and 5, you didn't kill more than them. You killed nothing. They killed nothing. You don't get Grind Them Down. So, like, it's one of those weird ones that just like, to max out, you have to kill more than your opponent every single round. Like, I found it's easy to get against Tau, where you can just kill a bunch of gun drones to try to score it. Or like people who just have a lot, like extreme MS, you have a bunch of like 1 to 2 character units or model units or something. But like outside of that, like you could, if you kill nothing on one turn, you're like, you just got a bad turn, you weakened a bunch of units, you're screwed. You lost 3 points. So I found that one to be kind of very risky. It's simple in theory, like, oh, just kill more, I'm good. And then you actually do it in practice, you're like, no, it's not good.
Yeah. Before we go over the second and third pick, to reiterate what we just talked about is, you'll notice that, when you look at the overall frequency distribution, there's this weird point after While We Stand We Fight when it jumps to Linebreaker, where it jumps down from 6 to 3%. Like literally 50% of frequency just disappears off the face of planet on that one. It's just like, what it means to me is that like these top ones here are like what people are just you're gonna almost guarantee to see one of them against your opponent, which makes sense. Like they're like half of them are from the core book.
Yeah, but, I mean, back on your philosophy, deploy scramblers, I think fits both of our philosophies. Where the shadow operations is the second to last, which the last one is the witchcraft, which again you usually never take unless it's only completely situational. But so it's the third one. Also, it's the one where you're just like, well, I have no other good options. May as well take one I can guarantee 10 points. So it's a very common third pick, I think.
Yeah, and it's not even that high of scoring points, which is actually like a misnomer, because this is like either get 10 or you get 0 in this one. Yeah. You don't get 7.8 or 9 or 8. You just get 0 or 10.
So what I'm hearing is 78.9% of players complete it.
That is not a good representation of number. What it means is that most of the time when somebody picks it, they get 10 points. Because the closer you get to 10 means most of the time.
Yeah. If it averaged 10 points, that means 100% of players would get all the points.
That's right. So the closer you get to 5, the more it's half, and then the closer you get to less than 5, that means somebody scores it. But honestly, like, not only do you get an opportunity loss of 5 points because you pick a secondary, you can only score 10 points max, but you still have, if you use basically Garrett's math here, 20% chance of not even doing it. Right. It's pretty risky.
Which Raise the Banners High over here is getting an 8.2 point on average. So that's like, That's better than Deploy Scramblers. So versus a 20% chance of getting nothing versus you getting about 8 points for like a third pick here.
Yeah.
I don't know. Raise the Banners High is looking a little bit better of a choice, maybe.
I mean, for me, it was like Linebreaker. I'm going to keep harping about Linebreaker.
Linebreaker is Battlefield Supremacy, while Raise the Banners High and Deploy Scramblers are so it's like if you... Like Linebreaker, you take Linebreaker. Oh, you're taking Teleport Homers as your shadow operations.
Yep.
So,
which, by the way, is 8.38 on average points scored.
Hey,
nobody takes it, but 8.38 on average. It just doubled. I mean, for me, I just double dip in Linebreaker and Teleport Homer at the same time.
Yeah. I'm trying to find if there's any like, based off this chart, any like hidden gems. And honestly, I'm thinking Teleport Homer is a hidden gem here. I was looking at it's like things that are taken less frequently but score high. It's like, oh, Titan Hunter, obviously that's taken less frequently to score high. Abhor the Witch, obviously priority targets, direct assault. But I'm like, all right, those ones clearly do. But yeah, teleport home are taken very infrequently and has a good portion over 8 points.
Yeah, you have to build your list for it though. It
Yeah.
comes down to it.
But
And that's
I think compared to other secondaries like Titan Hunter Bring It Down or whatever,
yeah.
which is going against your opponent's list, Teleport Homer is something. What my point is that it's something you can build. It's a thing that you can actively be in control of by building your list to do,
Yeah.
and it seems to be scoring fairly high. So it might
Yeah.
be something people who have been struggling with secondaries, like if they don't do well and raise the banners high or deploy scramblers, they just haven't been doing well on it. Maybe look at something like Teleport Homer as a third pick and build a list around that rather than looking at something like raise the banners high or deploy scramblers, which seems to be more common third picks.
Yep.
Which actually doesn't seem to be. They are. I'm looking at the data. They are more common third picks by a large margin.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, the third pick, echoing my sentiment, the third pick is like, shit, what do I do? Like, what do I pick now? Fuck. Like, deploy scramblers is the one I feel like it makes sense for third pick because it's kind of like, it's kind of the no-brainer one because you're like, I'm gonna be in my deployment zone. I'm gonna be in no man's land. I'm probably maybe gonna be my opponent's deployment zone.
Right.
Well, I better hope so. So it's very much so the kind of like, for me it's like it's the GIMP objective. It's like I got it. It's kind of, I got nothing else better to do, so I'm gonna take deploy homers. Deploy.
Which I think third picks in general are those I got nothing better to do picks, because I even in my philosophy of you pick them in order. But that's only for your first and second picks. Like you pick Battlefield Supremacy, and then you'll pick your next most likely one. Like between first and second, it just comes down to like, well, Engage All Fronts. I think the reason Engage All Fronts has a 40% is like you think that it's highly to be taken, but it also comes first over a second pick. I guess that was the point I was trying to make. Is it's probably, if it was taken purely based off which one I can get the most of, people would probably drop down to like 20%. I think it'd be closer to that 15 that we're seeing. But I do believe that third pick is, well, I picked my favorite two. Now what? Like I picked the obvious choices. Oh crap! Now what? I think that is, no matter what philosophy you follow on picking objectives, third pick is always the, I gotta just pick something now.
Yeah. I'm going to transition us now to the dumbest important graph because I want to leave some time for Q&A. When, hopefully we'll get some. So the reason why I called it the dumbest important graph because mathematically and statistically speaking, it's not measuring anything interesting, but it is measuring something interesting in the sense that we've been talking about this for weeks. Secondaries are important, but what's most important is primaries. And here's a really good visual representation of what the hell we're talking about. It's just measuring wins, loss, and ties, and then their spectrum of like where they sit between an average points of win and an average points of loss. And this is from the perspective of the player versus the opponent. So each dot represents the opposition. Okay, if I mouse over one, you'll see when I'm playing. Right now, this is all players when they're playing against Qatari and they win. This is the average of secondary, primary, and then like kind of like you can kind of see the breakdown and average between all of the secondary options. But the point is, if you're just generic player A, doesn't matter what you bring. This is, like I said, like pure mathematical averages here. You're gonna get this thing where this top right bracket here. So between the 20 points, starting at the 20 points secondary threshold and the 30 points primary threshold, which is the vertical axis, you're basically, if you land in that box, performance, you're probably 99% of the time winning. There's only really a couple outliers here. There's one very high loss versus Nurgle Demons, basically meaning that you scored very high, but you still lost. And and then a bunch of ties. But the moral of the story is like the concentration of wins sit in that very, very small square, versus the concentration of losses sits lower than that 30 primary and lower than that 30 secondary. What that means is the area for a loss is, I think on the visual like geometry, it's like a 33% bigger than the area for win, which means that for me, and I should explain that why primaries matters more, because I win consistently more if I score over 30 primary points than if I would score 30 secondary points. Because I can still win if I score over 20 secondary points, but if I score more than 30 primary points, I'm almost guaranteed. So like when you think about thresholds, it's that like if you get more than 30 primary and more than 20 secondary, you're in that bracket here, the winner's area, the winner's box, effectively. If you score less than those two, well, it's actually technically, if you score less than 30 primary and less than 30 secondary, you're in the loser's more area. Meaning now, like, we're basically weighing that the secondary doesn't weigh as much in terms of determining who wins or loses the game. At the end of the day, primary does, which is a weird, like, I don't know how to explain this and put in a visual more context for everybody on the audience here, but effectively, win primary. We spent like 20 minutes talking about like what secondaries you should pick, which is still important, but we don't talk about like winning the primary that often, because honestly, winning the primary is the same game every time. Control objectives. That's it.
Interestingly enough, if you get less than 20 on the primary, you can't win. Or the secondary.
Yeah.
So you still need to get at least 20 points on your secondary.
Yeah. Which is why a 5-point opportunity loss from deploy scramblers is like, it's pretty penalizing. Right? So I don't know, like that's why, in my opinion, like I don't like to take. Well, this is me caveat. It's not I don't like to take deploy scramblers. I don't like to build a list where I'm in a position where I'm forced to take deploy scramblers.
That's fair.
And I don't know about you, Garrett, but like I don't know how to better. Like, I was trying to come up with ways of representing this story in like visual like numerical representation for the audience, where they can like weigh and measure. But I was just like, you know what? Like, just put this in the scatter plot. Let's see what it looks like. And yeah, like wins are much tighter and fit in this much smaller box than losses. And it just means that you have very particular thresholds you have to get over, versus the losses are like, you know, they're particular, but they're also wider thresholds. So meaning that like to be a loser, it's easier effectively. To get a loss, it's easier to get a win. Which sounds stupid. That's why it's called the dumbest important graph. Of course getting a win is harder than getting a loss, Jeremy. As anybody who's ever played this game. But but like to represent that statistically, mathematically is actually kind of hard. And I have to literally sit there and explain this. If I could come up with a way where I didn't have to explain this, and just show it visually, then I would not be working for what I'm working at, and nor would I be doing this with your face. I would be somewhere in the Bahamas enjoying my early retirement. So, I don't know. Like, do you want to? I feel like I'm beating my audience up for like nothing they probably did, but you know what? I enjoy it.
I think it's just. We always like to remind people of this fact, and we've been talking about it a lot, but we just wanted to try to create a visual because, I mean, in 40K, everyone's focus is on the secondaries. I think that's because it's the one thing that is like in your control. Like people want to just see what secondaries are performing well, how well secondaries are performing, and stuff like that. But like we just want to put that big reminder out there that it's like, by the way, talking about secondaries is like making not a big impact. Like we're talking about minutia here, like how to, you know, just do better, get more points, but not get a win. Just get more points. We're just talking about which secondaries get more points for just this kind of like minutia. The reality is play for the primary, play for the primary, play for the primary. That's how you win. So
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, like, let's. This is a fun, like, to reiterate again. This is a fun. So I was shifting through like the Grand Legions. This is like, let's take a look at Xeno here. So the way to internalize this is, so it's kind of similar, bracket here. Basically, as a Xeno player, to win, you have to at least have more than 30 primary points.
yeah,
There's the one outlier that's like below 30. And like almost all of them had to have more than 30 secondary points to win. So like you could say that the bracket for a Xeno player to win is like this one tiny box. It's literally almost a third less than the previous box we talked about. And then for a loss, it's almost the entirety of the bottom here. You could score 30 points on secondary, but if you score less than 30 points on primary, you're gonna lose.
yeah. I think what would strengthen your case actually is if this graph elongated on the win side even. So if you got like less than 20, you can still win on the secondaries. Like I do think that this does show that winning, you do need to pay attention to secondaries. But wow, this one's all over the place.
Yeah, this is chaos. This is chaos, which is obviously chaotic, right? It just makes 100% sense. Where they have
I love this 10 point win.
Yeah. Half-Fleet Kraken. So apparently when they beat a Tyranid player that scored 0 points. So when it comes down to I mean it's just, but it's still like, it's still that weird top corner pocket. They just have a bunch of other outliers sitting away. But their losses are more tighter than the other views, meaning I would arguably say that like their windows for losing is like less than 35 on the primary and about 30 for secondary. So like this is one of the few factions that you could arguably say doing better in secondary is more important than primary by like that 5-point difference effectively. So yeah, guys, it's important to play the primary.
Yeah.
Don't get too focused on like nailing the secondary. I mean, obviously you need to nail the secondary to win, but like I think that we maybe it's just because of our show we talk a lot about how to perform well in secondaries, but I think as time goes on we're just finding in the data more and more that like primaries just kind of decide the game anyway. So you could equal, barring all skill set and dice, pick the right secondaries against your matchup, but at the end of the day, they're not gonna, even if you had an advantage over your opponent in terms of secondary and they just played primary better, you're still more likely to lose than win. It's basically what it comes down to. So I think it's mostly due to the fact, if I was gonna voice it in a way, that secondaries you can counter secondaries. It's harder to counter primaries. I mean, primaries you can still counter them, but there's a lot of secondaries which are a lot easier to counter. Especially secondaries get harder to score in the second half of the game.
I would actually argue the opposite. I think it's easier to counter the primary than the secondary, which is why the primary is a larger impact, because if you can actively go after the objectives your opponents are holding and get them off at the cost of your opponent being able to succeed on a secondary, that impact on the game is more prominent by denying your opponent the primary. And it's like, oh, cool, you got a bunch of secondary points. Wonderful. But I got all my secondary points and you got none of your primary points. So I win the game. I think it's because primary is the one thing that is like, because primary points are scored at the end of your next command phase. Well, a lot of secondaries are scored, like the most popular secondaries are the ones that are scored right away.
Yeah. But
they're the ones you can't actually do anything against. Like Bring It Down. There's nothing you can do against Bring It Down. You die. Engage in all fronts. Nothing you can do about it. Deploy Scramblers, there's a little bit you can do about it. But like I think most of the secondaries are actually things you can't do. The ones that do well are the ones you can't do anything against. While primary is the thing that you can go after and deny your opponent. That would be my argument.
I disagree with that. But only for missions which are when there is a mission that requires 5 points for 2 or more, I think you're right. When most missions are 5 points for 1 or more, and then 10 points for 2 or more versus 10 points for 3 or more, it's really hard to counter two primary objectives, unless your opponent is like incredibly static and purely defensive and does nothing or no aggressive plays for the entirety of the game. There's so many secondaries. If you're trying to play secondaries plus achieve primaries in the first half of the game, you're unlikely to be having the resources during the first half of the game to counter effectively your opponent's primary. And then the worst part is if you don't succeed your secondaries in the first 2 turns, or at least if you don't get in a good position to be able to get at least 15 points from all of them, or maximize, if you're at least around seeing 10 points in the first 2 turns, the odds are you're unlikely to finish scoring them by the end of the game.
Well, it seems like you're arguing that the secondaries make a huge impact on the game then. Putting that out there.
Well, of course they make an impact. They just don't make as much of an impact as we've been talking about. Because the caveat here is for the audience is we've been talking about the importance of secondaries for almost 2 months now, since we've been doing this show. But we haven't really talked about the importance of doing primary. And I think mathematically representing what we've been talking about is primaries are, if not, I would argue, are more important than secondaries.
Yeah, so it was probably better off to try to deny your opponent's secondary than try to score your own, or deny your opponent's primary than try to score your own secondary.
That's correct. I agree with that.
Yeah,
100%.
That's what I'm saying is that
I just don't think that's
the primary is more important. Yeah, so it's like just put more energy in trying to deny your opponent's primary than score your own secondary because they make a larger impact on the game.
Yeah, I agree. I just don't think that's happening very well. And it comes down to the OPSEC mechanic. We don't have enough counter to OPSEC. It literally it boils down to that. We just don't have enough counters to OPSEC. There are a lot of units that are like good at removing units off objectives, and then claiming an objective tend to not be OPSEC themselves. And all it takes is that like one OPSEC model to survive or just be bubble wrapped, and all of a sudden you're like, cool. Well, that was you exercising futility for that that turn. Not it might be important for the later turns, but like having that opponent still score that objective for one turn is a huge boon to that person, right? So we need more units which are OPSEC remove OPSEC and are also aggressive grabbing objective units. Like Reavers for Space Marines, basically. But the Reaver mechanic is I would say not that great, but at least it's something. So, well, we're hitting time, and then really, so I'll do a quick Q&A for the next. We'll give the audience another 3 minutes while I keep rambling on about random statistical knowledge of the game.
Well, I actually want to talk about something. It'd be interesting talking about future episodes. Look, just one of the things I love about this show is that you and I get to explore different pieces of data as we look at different things, and I think it'd be interesting to look at maybe in our first chart where we talk about scores over time and those where we have more data, because one of the things about the secondary data is we have little, is we haven't actually looked at. I know it's something that's popular among what a lot of people talk about, but just actually look at faction data at an aggregate, like how many points on average are Space Marines winning by. Like, there are Space Marines getting big wins, because we can get that data actually very easily without needing the scorecards to just see how many points are factions winning by on a large scale. Because this screen is what it is, but it's based off the scorecard data, so it's a smaller data pool. We can get a larger aggregate by ignoring all the scorecard data and just looking off of just the points. Yeah, we would lose the primary and secondary information, but we could still at least get like how many points are in total. Like we've always said, like, look, Slaanesh is doing so well, but at the few events that we have the scorecard data on, what if we looked at actually all of the games that are in BCP as a total? Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to look at faction data at that level.
I agree with that. I'd be down for that. That would just require you to do most of the work, though.
I mean, not really. I just have to add a field.
I know, but that's the amount of work required. I mean, I have to.
You're the one who has to. You're the one who would have to redesign your whole UI with the new BI information. So I think you have more work than I do.
You'd be surprised. It's just literally dragging in a field.
That's all it is for me as well. Cool.
Perfect.
Good to know.
Okay. Since it seems to be that our audience is mostly our co-host Gonzalez, which has never any interesting question to pose. So yes, shade. I'm going to wrap this up for tonight. Thank you again, Garrett, for coming and co-hosting this with me, and thank
My
you
pleasure.
for your work into making this happen. We'll be back in 2 weeks to cover. I don't know what topic yet, but I'm sure I'll come up with something probably dumb, like the dumbest important graph, and we'll see if we maybe can just one day just have a mailbag episode, just like have people ask us questions ahead of time that we can answer, because not everybody can make this recording live, on the Thursday afternoon. So.
Yeah.
I do know I get some questions from people on Discord privately, so I will definitely be willing to entertain just a mailbag episode over some scotch in a fire pit. Or
thank you,
fireplace.
Dan Miner. Really glad that you're liking the show.
Yeah, Dan. Can't wait to actually come back to West Coast GT at some point. It'll be nice to go play some games in Vancouver, BC, where really I just go there to eat and drink more than game. But
maybe play in French with some French Canadians again.
Oh, that would be cool. That was the only time I think I've ever played a game of Age of Sigmar in French. So that was a challenge, by the way, for me.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Having to play AOS in purely was his codexes in French? That's I never asked that.
It's battle tomes. I don't think we're in French, but honestly, it didn't really. The problem is it's measurements. Like, having to switch my brain, because like when I'm speaking French, I'm thinking kilometers or meters, effectively.
Mm-hmm.
So all of a sudden I have to explain things in inches in French was like a weird like mental, cognitive dissonance, which is just like.
Does French have a word for inch?
Yeah. It is a thumb. An inch is a pouce, which is a thumb.
Nice. Makes sense.
Because that's what it used to be in English, which
yeah. Well, like the foot is a foot.
Yeah, and it is the same in French. Pied. It's the same. So apparently, the imperial system is based off body parts. So
I like. Well, my father, who notoriously gave me a lot of bad info. I know we're like way over time and way off topic now, but my father, he was saying that the foot was based off of the measurement of the king's foot.
Yeah, I don't
think that's true, but it's a great way to talk about the imperial system, where every time there was a new king, the measurement system changed because the king's foot would change, or the king's thumb would change.
America gave up. Sorry, finish your statement.
No, it's just that's just like basically the measurement systems was based off of the monarchy.
The America was able to, rid himself of the yoke of monarchy, but yet kept the imperial system based off royal body parts. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense to me. Anyway, have a great rest of your day. We will see you in 2 weeks. Enjoy the holidays. Don't drink too much pumpkin spice lattes and listen to Frank Sinatra in a store, because I think at this point that would be the equivalent of forcing me to commit suicide. Anyway.
It's all about Mariah Carey, man.
Okay, sure. She hasn't released an album since like 10 years ago? Like,
she doesn't need to. It's the same album every year. 100 years from now, you're gonna be listening to Mariah Carey.
If I live that long and I'm still listening to Mariah Carey, I'll count my blessings. All right, guys. All right. Have a lovely day. Bye, all.